Hello, everybody. Welcome to Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melenda, and happy to have you all here this evening. Tonight, we are going to be going back to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and we are going to bring you a live version of our Combat and Tactics series, which I know has been a little bit long in the tooth. Of course, if you're a patron of the Knights of Last Call, you got a early release of our Versus Spellcaster Combat and Tactics video, which was supposed to come out, trust me, it was supposed to come out way earlier today, or way earlier this year. But editing is a real pain in the butt. But the patrons got a chance for it. So this is us bringing back Combat and Tactics, and this was specifically a request from one of our patrons, one of our legendary patrons, Frosty, who's been playing a lot of Pathfinder 2nd Edition in our mega global Northern Reaches mega campaign. And realized, there's other people who are playing that have sort of maybe a more advanced professional grasp of the game, which is nothing to be ashamed of, that are kind of utilizing all of the levers that are available to you. And one of the ways that they are utilizing that is through equipment. So he asked if we could maybe do a video about how to get the most out of your equipment. And then we had a tip goal, which you all supported. So here we are. We're going to talk about this. Now, I realized very quickly that there's probably too much to talk about. There's a lot of items. There's a lot of equipment. There's a lot of magic items in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And so we're going to do this as a series of videos, probably about maybe 2, maybe 3 videos to kind of cover the main sticking points. Because I think... Now, if you're an expert to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you may find some of this information fairly rudimentary, but I do think that there's a lot of people out there who are new to the game, or maybe have been playing for a long time, but have never really, opened up the hood and kind of got into what makes the game tick, that could benefit from understanding some of the certain key milestones and some of the key signposts that you really should have in place on your character. And I think that... long story short, I think that your character should definitely have the right armor and weapons. And then as your character advances through the game, I really do feel like you should take full advantage of the fact that you get 10 points of, up to 10 items that you can have invested at any one time. Now, your armor almost always counts for one of these. So that gives you 9 items with the invested trait that you can add to your character's capabilities. And if you're not doing that, you're leaving something on the table. And I think there's something to be said about all of that. We have a super chat coming in with 10 Great British pounds from Cybersmith. Says, "'Tis late, we'll catch the VOD, but consider RH gauntlet, right-handed gauntlet plus left-handed gauntlet plus staff equals 3 weapons, 3 spell hearts, 3 extra cantrips. Also for lower level gear, the crowbar and glass cutter are often overlooked." Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's something to be said about the gauntlet, but I will say this, and spell hearts could particularly be, I think, are an item that people sleep on. But I will say this, yes to the crowbar. I don't think we're going to get too much into adventuring equipment today, but I will say that the crowbar has a very strange interaction in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that if you are playing a more low-level game, can really kind of kick you in the butt. And which is the crowbar. If you do not have a crowbar and you're trying to force something open, you actually get a penalty to your athletics check to force something open. And my party, who's been playing in the Abomination Vaults, found that out the hard way when the barbarian, played by Bob, failed to force open a door because of the penalty from the crowbar, not having a crowbar. And as a result, they experienced a random encounter, which I added to Abomination Bolts. And that random encounter led to a series of misadventures, which eventually led to Bob's character's death. So I can safely say that if they had a crowbar, Bob's character would still be alive. Now, of course, he replaced his barbarian with a kineticist. So, it's probably for the best. But it is a saying, it goes to show you that, especially at the lower levels of play, I'd say before level, I consider low tier to be sort of below like level 7. Once you start getting to level 7, level 9, you start getting enough resources, especially magical resources, that some of the mundane stuff starts to become a little bit, crowbars aren't that big of a deal when you can cast rank 5 spells at level 9, you can cast pass wall and just walk through walls, right? But like at low level, it could be pretty good. But thank you, Cybersmith, for the support. Let's see what else we have here going on today. Just want to say a quick shout out and hello to everybody who's here. Beowulf, Rule Cool, Multiverse DM, Gabriel, Whoopelstein, rocking their awesome, sexy loyalty badge. Thank you so much for being here. Brewy is only staying for a few minutes, but then is dipping out. Hector, the name of the artist is Dylan Stilts or Dylan Stitz, and the name of the track is called Rain Check. So it has become the unofficial theme song of Knights of Last Call live streams. Austin can't make it today, doing session 0 for a 4E game with some other patrons. I saw that on the event list. Austin, of course, is talking about Knights of Last Call Patreon, where not only do we run our 40, 50 plus person Pathfinder 2 campaign called Northern Reaches, but we also run an unbelievable amount of community games. We have play-by-post games for people who maybe can't. We actually have an insanely popular play-by-post community, I think, with several completed campaigns and several games concurrently running. So there's a ton of gaming always going on in our Discord. And it's not just Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's 4th Edition D&D. It's Call of Cthulhu. It's Fabula Ultima. It's Avatar Legends. It's Blades in the Dark. It's, you get what I'm saying. Anyways, but that is an acceptable thing, Austin, because we were talking a little bit here for our own home game about maybe cracking back open the 4th edition. KC is here. What's up, KC? Salve Roll Ray, salute to you as well. Mark C says, as a GM, I'm terrible about giving out treasure. Oh, man, well, maybe we can talk about that. Let's see here. George, hello. Icarus, talismans are stupid and overpriced. Prove me wrong. Talismans are mostly stupid and overpriced. And I believe that Paizo agrees with you. I think one of the things that they said that they are going to fix or update or put a lot of extra tender love and care into will be the talisman systems. Shadrum with their red loyalty badge. What's up, Shadrum? Rule of Cool says just 2 words: phantasmal doorknob. Yeah, phantasmal doorknob is stupid. All right, like we all know that. I don't. We could go off into a whole separate side tangent about this, but there are items that have come out in the last year or so in books, things like Treasure Vault, things like Rage of Elements, and it clearly shows that these books are written by a lot of freelancers who sometimes, I think, either don't know the system as well as they should, or they just have a lot on their plates. And ultimately, I don't even blame the freelancers who are submitting it. I blame the sort of editors for letting these things go through. And we saw this, right, with things like Black Tendril Shot, which was probably like the most egregious example of this. And I remember that when we were covering Treasure Vault as a preview, and to be fair, we got flack from Paizo for being a little bit more than a preview. We kind of ended up doing a little bit of a review, but we said this was horrible and it was broken and who the hell let this into the game? And everybody was kind of saying, oh, why are you being so mean, Derek? And then Paizo, day one errated it. I think Phantasmal Doorknob is one of those as well. I just think it slipped through and it should not have slipped through. YouTube hates me today. Welcome, Damian Williams. Henry says, hey, did my tip message come through? Henry, I did not see your tip message, my friend. Let's see here. I don't know if we have it. Henry. Okay, sorry, Henry. I see your tip message, but it did not come through. So I will shout it out. Henry said, excited for this stream. But Derek, you have to put Dragonbane on the list. If you can get over the duck, you're gonna love it. Yeah, I think Dragonbane definitely deserves a closer look. I like beer and pretzel style RPGs, and I think it could definitely be worth, digging into. So thank you for the tip, Henry, but I don't think you have to convince me that much. I will admit the big duck on the cover does turn me off a little bit, but I might be able to get past it, especially if I'm kind of in that sort of, the game feels like it should be serious, but then I see the big duck and it makes me not want to think it's serious. Bruno, will relics be covered on this stream? Probably not today's stream. I think today we're going to mostly talk about weapons, armor, weapon runes, armor runes, and maybe touch on shields if we have time. Dr. Metropolis is not familiar with Pathfinder 2 items. I like the idea of a magic sword leveling up with the player. Really makes it feel legendary. Is this doable in the base rules? Dr. Metropolis, it absolutely is. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the sort of expected progression of the game. But the answer is you could basically do that through the automatic bonus progression rule system, which is a variant rule found in the Game Master's Guide, which allows basically any weapon that the characters pick up to essentially be at the appropriate level of magic. But in terms of making the weapon sort of level up, if you wanted to keep your game completely balanced, you could totally do this. You could make it part of a milestone based achievement. You could tie it into, like, it could just be, well, when you get to a certain level, your sword grows in power as your legend grows, or you could make it more diegetic and you could say, if your characters, if the sword bathes in the blood of the red dragon, or if you take it to the crystalline temple on the mountaintop and infuse it in the light of the last sun of autumn, that it sort of escalates to its next tier. And you could totally make that part of your campaign. And if you want to keep it balanced within the rule set of the game, you would just have to manage the character's wealth acquisition through other channels and sort of maybe give them a little less gold than you might have given them otherwise, because you're kind of giving it to them in that form. Although we'll also talk a little bit about why I think gold management and treasure management doesn't matter as much in Pathfinder 2 as some people think it is. Although there are problems that can generate as a result of it. But one of the things I think that a lot of reasons people don't have fun with magic items is, quite frankly, is because they don't have enough money. And I think having money is fun. I mean, you're right. We're playing these games for the power fantasy. So, okay, you sent it before the stream started. All right. Well, I saw it in the history, so thank you, Henry. London, welcome. Cybersmith, just before I go, said he was out. He's back in. On the topic of talismans, a crying angel pendant saved me from knocking an ally in the play by post earlier today. Beware the nat one. Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you have a spot available on your armor for a talisman, you should probably have a talisman there. Which one you should have equipped, or a spell heart, I suppose. You should probably have something there, but it depends on what your specific needs are. But that's pretty cool. Crying Angel Pandit is, of course, the one that lets you re-roll either nat ones or failed treat wounds checks. So it could be a nice thing. A lot of times, especially if you're using it in a battlefield medicine situation in the middle of a tense combat and you're relying on that hit points. The last thing you want to do is critically fail and hurt your ally rather than heal them. So. Let's see. Wojo says it feels like they're getting rid of the proficiency requirements. And to be fair, I thought that was a major problem, because a lot of times the talismans that I would be interested in taking were, like, for example, the cat one, Jade Cat, the one that let you basically safe fall. It's like, well, in order to take that, you basically already have to be an expert in acrobatics, which means you probably already took the safe fall or the cat fall skill feat. The character that wants that is the character that's like, oh, I'm not acrobatic, and I would love to have the additional protection of being able to safe fall a little bit by putting this talisman onto my armor, but I can't, because in order to do that, I already need to be good at the thing that I'm doing. So I think that's okay. An owlbear claw early on is very good. Let's see. GM Scott has just joined and catching up at 1.75 speed. Welcome. Do you think well, this isn't really on topic, but do you think that they will remaster the rogues in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? I think they're going to mostly leave rogues alone. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think they're going to change much. I mean, they should, I think, make Mastermind Rogue better, and I would expect for them to give a little bit of love to the Mastermind Rogue. I'm a big fan, obviously, of the Thief. I'm a big fan of the Ruffian, but the mastermind, I think, could use a little help. And I would, in general, I would say that the sly, what's it called? The scoundrel is probably in an okay space. Eldritch Trickster probably could use help, but my guess is they're not going to. So, but I do think that they're going to do something about the mastermind. I just don't think it performs well enough. So. Exactly, Ian Ryder. The talismans that are perfect for patching up your weaker skills, but they require you to not be weak in those skills, which defeats the purpose. You know, it's like, hey, look, you only get one slot for a talisman, and you have to spend the money for it. So, you know, you're paying your price, you know. So I would definitely agree with you there. Let's see. I want to run a Pathfinder 2nd edition campaign so bad, and you fuel this aspiration so much. Well, you know, I no time like the present, although next month we've got the remaster coming out. So, you know, I think it's a great time to kind of get your feet wet and dive in if that is what you're interested in doing. Loth says, make opportune backstabber cord too good not to take. It's pretty good. Be me, Mastermind Rogue in a brand new campaign. I hope they do. Yeah, I mean, again, I think the Rogue is a very solid class with some really great feats, incredible feats, and you know, the racket that you choose can certainly have an impact. But you know, whoa, Davpar.
Davpar_Ilmad tipped $50. I never managed to catch the live streams to tip, but always watch the VOD. Giving a stream element tip to make sure you get the full amount, but put the tip towards items and equipment part 2.
All right. I will respect it. Thank you so much for the tip, and thank you so much for your support. I do still have the Final Fantasy emotes, Bob. I will respect the request that goes the other way. So let me quickly adjust that there. All right. Boom. There we go. All right. Thank you so much for that support, Davpar, and appreciate you and appreciate the kind words. And thank you for that. Yeah. Okay. So, items, magical items, equipment in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So let's first, we do have the whiteboard ready if we need to go to it. But first thing you have to realize in Pathfinder 2nd edition is that, again, this is neither a good thing or a bad thing, but the math is very tight. And as part of that progression, as part of the math of this game, each level that your character increases, the defenses, attack bonus, and by defenses, I mean the armor class, I mean the saving throws, the attack bonuses of the monsters that you're fighting will go up each level as well. Now, as we all know, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, you get your level added to your bonus, whether that be your armor class or your attack roll. And of course, you also have your proficiency, which increases in 2-point increments as you go up through the level. In some cases, it goes as high as +4 at expert. Most people go to +6, and then some very special people get to go all the way to +8 at legendary. Then we add our stat bonus. And then we have 3 ways to add a bonus on top of those, okay? And this is where we kind of get into the world of magic items and equipment. And I guess I was going to hold off, but I guess we're going to have to go to the whiteboard here. It's just too good to not go to the whiteboard. Let me see if I can bring up the whiteboard here. Here it is. Boom. Boom. All right. So, as a reminder, I should say, so when we're talking about leveling up our characters for our items, So the bonus in this game is our level plus our proficiency, which is technically the one and the same, plus our stat or ability boost or ability bonus, right? And that gives us a certain value. But on top of that, there are 3 other things that you can add. You can have an item bonus. You can have a circumstance bonus. And you can have a status bonus. Now, circumstance bonuses and status bonuses are usually fairly temporary. They usually come from, in the case of status bonuses, they usually come from spells or magical sort of effects or doodads. And circumstance bonuses usually come from actions or feats, I would say more mundane sources. They're usually very temporary. Circumstance bonuses in particular usually only last a round, maybe sometimes 1 attack. And status bonuses tend to last, about a minute, like the duration of most spells. Although there are some spells that stand out in the game, like heroism, which lasts 10 minutes, that really give you a lot of bang for your buck. The only one of these 3 that is essentially permanent is the item bonus to your character's total to hit bonus or defense bonus. And as a result of that, the math of the game itself, as the monsters or your foe's armor class is going up across the levels, the game assumes that at certain points in the progression of the game, you will have the right item on your character sheet. Okay, and so what I'm trying to say is, if you do not get the right items at the right levels, it is not a simple issue of your character is not gaining a bonus. No, the bonus that you get from that item has already been baked into the math of the game. The designers of this game understand that people are going to go out and they're going to try to get magical items. So if your character doesn't have the right magical item at the right time, they are going to be underperforming. Okay? Underperforming. And unless you're playing with a GM who's, particularly, I guess I would say particularly generous, because of the way that the gold expression works in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it is very unlikely that your character will get a magical item super early. It can happen, but it is, if a magic item is level 8, then the likelihood of you getting that item when you're level 5 or level 6 is pretty low. You might get it at level 7, in which case, enjoy the fun. But because gold in Pathfinder 2nd Edition tends to double every 2 levels, it means that once you get above your character level, things get really expensive really, really fast. And conversely, things that are below your level get really, really cheap really, really fast. All right. So the long and the short of it is, at certain levels of the game, you really should make it your priority to use your character's gold or resources, or as a GM, you should be providing opportunities for characters to get certain key items. So, and again, we're going to go specifically into, some of the weapons and armor, but I kind of want to cover this first. If you don't see anything else from this, thing from takeaway. And again, I know for people who've been playing the game for, a while, this is all basic stuff. So nothing super new here. So this is the weapon and armor runes, and this is the level of those items. In other words, a +1 potency rune for a weapon is a level 2 magic item. That means that in the math of the game, there's a couple of things that we should take away from this. Number 1, it means that once your character is level 2, the game's math assumes that your character will have a +1 potency rune on their weapon, right? And as I said before, your bonus to, let's say, your attack roll with your weapon is going to be your level plus your proficiency, plus your ability modifier, your stat, and this item bonus. And because we have reached level 2, and this potency crystal, or I'm sorry, this potency rune is now available to our characters, the math of the game now assumes that we should have that. And as a result, that means that basically at level 2, and for the rest of the game, all the monsters' armor classes are 1 point higher than they kind of would be otherwise. And by the time you get to level 10, those armor classes are 2 points higher than they should be otherwise, because the game assumes that you are making up the difference of it with this potency crystal. All right. What that means is that if your character does not have the right level of item, you are going to be behind the 8 ball. You are going to be a point or potentially 2 points behind where the math expects you to be. Now, you may say that's not the end of the world, and I agree with you. For the most part, it is not, because unless you're fighting very high level foes, it doesn't tend to matter that much. However, if you're playing a standard Paizo adventure path, they have a tendency to use a lot of high level foes. They tend to use a lot of encounters that are severe or higher with only a handful of foes. And that means that having that additional point or two can make a really big difference. And this is something else that we talk about a lot on this stream or on this channel, which is, remember that your bonus to attack roll in Pathfinder 2nd Edition isn't just about hitting, okay? It's also about your character's critting, okay? And the difference between having the right potency item, right potency bonus and not, could be the difference between you critting on an 18, 19, and 20 versus you just critting on a 20. So that's you critting 15% of the time, and that's you critting 5% of the time, which is literally triple the difference. All right. So you do need to be you need to be pretty aware of this. So to that end, one of the things that we kind of make sure that we sort of understand is when we talk about your sort of character, when you're talking about your character's build, which again, I don't love, you need to factor in at least at the bare minimum for weapon and armor, you need to factor in these runes. These are must-have purchases, in my personal opinion, just to make the game function. Now, we had a super chat I missed. Let me go back and grab it. Dr. Metropolis said, took your advice and made my Martial Ranger using a fighter and Beastmaster devotion. I call it Hunter to avoid stepping on the Tolkien Ranger's toes. A fighter with a lot of the bow feats, with the Beastmaster devotion. Honestly, Dr. Metropolis, after you pick up 3 or 4 feats out of the Beastmaster devotion, you might, assuming you're using free archetype, you might pick up Ranger dedication just to get a couple of those Ranger feats that are, pretty, some of the Ranger feats are okay. And really make yourself feel like a Ranger. But with fighter and Beastmaster, yeah, you're definitely basically being a martial, kind of a World of Warcraft martial hunter, which is pretty cool. Let's see here. Henry, that is true. There are sometimes very rarely untyped bonus, but yes. Now, I am not here to say whether or not this is good design. We could get into the philosophy of this, which is probably also why I said we're only going to cover weapons and armor. But to make a long story short, characters who play in a role-playing game, players, that means you, are going to do everything in their power to try to get the highest possible attack bonus, the highest possible armor class that they can. It just makes the most sense. And so as a game designer, when you're sitting down to design a game, you can do one of two things. You can stick your head in the sand and you could pretend and that maybe certain characters, maybe there's certain players out there who won't get, a +2 potency rune at level 10. And, maybe they're level 6 and they're still using a normal weapon that does not have a striking rune and does not have a potency rune. You could do that. But if you design your game for that player, then the game will become trivially easy and dare I say, a cakewalk for any player who puts in a little bit of work in making a more mechanically superior build. And this is what they saw happen a lot in Pathfinder 1. And so with Pathfinder 2, sort of the decision was, let's balance the game around the assumption that everybody's basically making optimal or nearly optimal choices. And so that is sort of where this sort of decision is rooted in. Okay, so long story short, your potency crystals, your potency runes come in on weapon and armor. And you have striking runes, which add to bonus damage, and you have resilient runes, which add to your saving throws. And I consider these to be must-have purchases. And you can see that there are certain parts of the game, like at level 10, 11, and 12, where there's such a, you should get your new potency +2 at 10. You should get armor potency +2 at 11. You should get a greater striking rune at 12. You don't have necessarily a lot of room in the budget for other items. On the other hand, there are some levels like 6 and 7 where you've gotten your items equipped and you have a little bit more room in your budget, and you can start to think about putting additional runes onto the weapon and armor. So that's kind of, a sort of a high level understanding of what the sort of base progression is. But you definitely want to make sure that you are sort of keeping this in mind when you make your character. And so if we kind of look at this, and we'll get into this when we cover the weapons themselves, but remember that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, a weapon can have a +1 potency rune or a +2 potency rune or a +3 potency rune. That +3 potency rune, by the way, doesn't come all the way to the end of the game. Those are called fundamental runes. However, the bonus that you have from your potency rune determines the number of property runes that your weapon can have. So in other words, when you have a +1 weapon, you can have 1 property rune. When you have a +2 weapon, you can have 2. And when you have +3, you can have 3. And so what that lets us do is it lets us understand that if we pick up our potency +1 at level 2, our weapon essentially now has an open slot on it that we can fill with 1 property rune. And ideally, if we're trying to maximize the game, we want to fill that space as soon as possible, right? Like that is an opportunity for us to add an extra dimension to our character's ability or power. So, and of course at level 10, when we had a +2 rune, then we can put 2 in. So ideally, sometime between level 3 and 9, we would put a property rune into our weapon. Now, some of this comes down to, well, what are the property runes? Which ones are worth it? Which ones are good? And how much money you have available. And obviously, the sooner you can get that property rune in, the better, right? Because you're getting, you're having more fun with it for a longer period of time as you play through the game. And you might expect, as you might expect, because you have because some of the lower level runes are pretty weak and not really worth taking. And because you have to buy a striking rune at level 4 and a potency rune on your armor at level 5, one of the better levels to start looking to put your first rune into your property, into your weapon, is around, I would say, level 6, 7, or 8. And so this is really when you should be looking for that first property rune for your weapon. Similarly, you should be sort of looking in this space for your second, and then at this level, you have so much money, it's almost irrelevant. But basically, as soon as you get your potency +3, you can really be looking at putting in a third rune. And we'll get into this when we cover the runes more specifically. So again, I know that this is probably Pathfinder 2 101 for a lot of people, maybe 102. But it is sort of understanding that, just the same way that you get 10 or 11 feats, right? Throughout your character's 20 levels, your character gets, 10 to 12 items that they can invest into. And so this is also an important part of how you build the character. All right, let me see if I have anything here in chat. Remember, any super chats or tips will get addressed as ASAP. But I try not to miss anybody's chat. I got it right here in my teleprompter, so we can have to go through that. Let's see. Have I ever done a deep dive on proficiency without level? No, I have not done a deep dive on it, but I think it is cool. For sure. I think there's a lot of, to be honest with you, never win realm. Proficiency without level, Pathfinder 2 is a lot like, in my opinion, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. It's a flat math system with a very, very gradual increase. The same way that in D&D 5e, you get a couple of ASIs that'll take your ability stats up. You get a couple, your proficiency bonus slowly ticks up over the course of the game. In my personal opinion, proficiency without level does pretty much the same thing, because the main thing that's going to be increasing is going to be your +2 from proficiency every 5 or 6 levels, and you'll get like 1 or 2 points of improvement from your ability scores over the course of the game. So you're really only looking at something in the neighborhood of plus maybe 6 or 7 points of accuracy bonus, I think, over 20 levels, which is a lot less than the plus 27 bonus or 28 bonus. I can't remember exactly what it is that you get in the normal game. So that means that higher level threats, lower level threats can be sort of used more casually. And that sounds a lot like 5th edition. But because of that, you run into some of the other issues that 5th edition has, right? Which is with action economy. And the fact is that in Pathfinder 2, you can throw a lot of lower level monsters at your party, and they will basically wipe the floor with them, because the party has level on their side. It's being added to their attack rolls, being added to their armor class. So those lower level monsters basically have no chance to hit them. But when you remove level, suddenly that monster that is 3 or 4 or 5 levels below the party now has a really, really reasonable chance of hitting. And if you throw a ton of them at the party, it can really quickly overwhelm them, which means that it's easier to throw multiple, which means that spellcasters potentially become more useful. I mean, it doesn't just change the math of the game, it changes the way that you play the game. So, it's something to consider. Guitar guy Nick is really high right now and hopes I have a great stream. Well, I hope you have a great stream. Sounds like you are well on your way. George Harris, can we talk about the weapon auto advancement optional rule? So we kind of talked about this a little bit, George, but you know what? I will kind of reiterate here, which is this. If you use the automatic bonus progression rule, or what's sometimes referred to as ABP, automatic bonus progression. What automatic bonus progression optional rule does is, instead of your character having to go out and get a +1 rune stone, +1 weapon potency rune on a rune stone, and using a craft check and adding it to your weapon, and now you have one weapon, let's say your longsword, which has a +1 weapon. Automatic bonus progression just says, as soon as a PC reaches level 2, any weapon that they use, their dagger, their sword, their bow, the spare hammer that they keep, stashed but underneath their backpack, just in case, all of those essentially are treated as having a +1 potency rune on them. Similarly, 2 levels later, when you get to level 4, all of your weapons, including one that you might pick up tomorrow, are now +1 striking, meaning you're adding an extra weapon die to your damage roll, weapons. What this does, now again, I like this rule. I used this rule where if you go and look up our quest for the Frozen Flame AP, a quick spot check of that AP will show you that it's very, very, very light on treasure. And also the characters are supposed to be sort of out in the wilderness and running for their lives. And, I don't want to get too much into the spoilers. Not exactly a lot of time for shopping or crafting. And so I wanted to make sure, though, that the game still functioned. And so I will say this. If your Pathfinder 2nd Edition game doesn't follow some of those classic tropes of D20 fantasy adventure, which is to say the characters are routinely going into places or going on quests where they are rewarded with tons of money and treasure that they can use, that they can sell to get their own stuff, right? If your characters aren't in a position to be able to be sort of being richly rewarded, and or you're playing in a campaign where the characters do not have a lot of downtime in which they could use things like the magical crafting feat, their craft skills, in order to sort of make the items with the money that they've received, and make their own items available to them. And if they don't have downtime and they don't have money and they don't have a way to shop or buy or bargain for these items, I would absolutely recommend that you use automatic bonus progression. And it's for those reasons that I just listed why I used automatic bonus progression in the Quest for the Frozen Flame adventure path. And quite frankly, I'm surprised that the Quest for the Frozen Flame adventure path didn't just say, by default, you should be using this rule for this particular campaign. So yeah, good question though. Let's see. Let's see here. See Cav. Hello, what's up? Glad to see you. Fruitless Endeavor has never played Pathfinder, so this explanation is actually very much appreciated. Well, there you go, Fruitless Endeavor. I get proficiency without level it does change a lot of the core assumptions of the game, Bruno. And I would argue it makes it a lot more like 5th edition, and that could either be a bad thing or a good thing. Loth asked a question about investing. Now, we didn't really get into investing, Loth. We can kind of get into that a little bit right now. I'm trying to give, we're going to hopefully cover weapons and armor, but I'm also trying to give you a primer on how magic items and how equipment work in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So let me go see if I can find here a example of an item really quickly here. All right. Here we go. We have got here. Oh, goodness. All right. We have a, geez, there's so many items. There's so many of these stupid things. I'm just trying to find a good one that actually is kind of fun. All right, here we go. So here is a item from the game. These are healer's gloves. And you can see that the item level is at least 4. There's actually 2 forms of healer's glove. There's healer's gloves and greater healer's gloves. Healer's gloves is level 4. Greater healer's gloves is level 9. And one of the things that you want to pay attention to here is this word, which says invested. All right. This trait means that in order to use this item, you must invest it. All right. Now, this might be an action that you're not aware exists in the game, but it does. Okay. It's called the invest an item check. Now, to be fair, this action doesn't actually really matter, and no one's ever really going to make you like do it. But technically, it is an item it does exist in the game. Okay. Which is basically, if you've seen the Dungeons and Dragon movie, remember the mage who kind of sucks but ends up not sucking at the end, how he's trying to put on the helmet and attune it, but it keeps failing. All right. Putting on your magical item that has the invested trait sort of is you using some of your inner will, your inner strength to empower the item and sort of link it to your character's soul or chakra or whatever. Okay. So to invest an item, you invest your energy in an item with the invested trait as you don it. This process requires 1 or more interact actions, usually taking the same amount of time as it does to don the item. In other words, if you have a magical helmet, or in this case, you have a magical set of gloves, then the act of putting them on, right? Which most of the time you're going to be doing this, when you're not in combat. You're going to be doing this, at camp in the morning or whenever you get your healer's gloves, when you buy them from the merchant or whatever. When you put them on, okay, this is called investing the item. And once you've invested the item, that's when you start to gain the benefits from its constant magical abilities, as long as you meet the other requirements. All right. And for most of the time, this means that you have to be wearing the item. So if you invest the healer's gloves, as long as you keep them on your hands, you are going to be able to use their powers or gain whatever benefits they give you. For example, these healer gloves here give us a +1 item bonus to our medicine checks, which is pretty sweet. And they also give us an ability once a day for a single action, which has the interact trait. We can soothe the wounds of a willing, living, adjacent creature, and we heal them for 2d6 plus 7 hit points. All right. This, when you invest an item, it lasts until you remove the item. So most of the time, it's one and done, and you don't have to think about it. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the number of items that you can invest is 10. Okay? 10 in a day. If you remove an invested item, it loses its investiture, but it still counts against your daily limit. What does that mean? It means that if I put on healer's gloves in the morning, okay, that is one of my 10 investments that I can do for the day. And let's say I go out and I'm in a combat and I use my healer's gloves to heal somebody for 2d6 plus 7. Well, I can only do that once a day. But I really like being able to do that. Good thing I bought a backup pair of healer's gloves. That's right. I have 2 pairs of healer's gloves. So what I do after the combat, while everybody else is sort of healing up or looting the dead bodies, I take off my first set of healer's gloves. That ends their investiture. I put those back in my backpack. I take my second pair of healer's gloves out and I put them on. Guess what? I am now investing an item, but it's a new item and I'm investing into it by putting it on. And so that takes one of my 10 investments for the day. All right. So that means that in a given 24-hour period, you can essentially only have 10 items that have the invested trait on your character at any one time, or if for some odd reason you split it up throughout the course of the day, you can still never benefit from more than 10 items over the course of a 24-hour period. So in my personal opinion, these are kind of like 10 feat slots. The same way that your character gets 10 feats. Well, some characters get a bonus feat at level 1, but most characters get a feat at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc., etc. You get 10 magical item slots. So you want to be, now it's going to be hard to fill these up real early because, your character, gold is precious. Magical items are sometimes hard to come by. But I strongly recommend that if you really want to enjoy all that Pathfinder 2nd Edition has to offer, is you should try to maximize your character by filling out all of your invested item slots. And by the time your character is, level 10, level 12, maybe, I think being at level 10 and having all 10 of your character's invested slots filled is a good goal to have. But as we say this, be aware that not every magical item has the invested trait. So this kind of gets to what somebody was saying before, which is to say certain magical items, namely weapons, do not have the invested trait. So that means if your character picks up a magical sword and uses it, it doesn't require investing. It doesn't take any of your investment points. You can swing and swap out magical weapons all day. In other words, your character could pull out their magic longsword, use that for a while, put it away, pull out their magic bow, shoot a couple times, pull back out the longsword, continue to use it. None of those require investing. None of those take any part of your 10 limits. All right. But interestingly enough, armor does. So, generally speaking, if it's something that you're like wearing it's going to take investment. If it's something that you're just holding or using like a tool or a weapon, it will not require investment. But if there's ever a doubt in your mind, you can always check and see if it has the invested trait. All right. So again, we're far off the reservation here. Let's see here. What else do we got? So Wojo, that is correct. So a armor requires one, when you put on your magic armor, it requires one investment. Whether that armor has a bunch of runes on it, or just a single +1 potency rune. Shadram is running Frozen Flame with ABB for the same reasons I did, but I like it, but I find that a lot of the items that give skill bonuses are kind of meh. That is also true. I started creating my own items instead. That is pretty sweet. Ooh, James. Now, our quest for the Frozen Flame game was kind of wrapping up when Battle Zoo Monster Parts system came out. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think the Monster Part system works really, really well with that particular AP in particular. So pretty good there. All right, trying to get caught up here. Whoopelstein with a $50 super chat. Rage of Elements, all spells ranked when? Well, Jesus, Whoopelstein, you're going to make me do this. Are the Rage of Elements spells that good? I don't know. I mean, we're in the back half of the year here. I mean, we've got the remaster coming out, so we're going to probably be doing a lot more Pathfinder 2 streams over the next couple of months. I'm sure we could fit a Rage. I mean, ultimately, Whoopelstein, what needs to be done, and I say this as someone who would almost rather jump off a bridge, is obviously there's going to be changes to some of these spells. So part of what we need to do is figure out all the spells in the core book that got a change, and then potentially look at re-rating them. And, see if that changes the ranking. And then when we're going back and seeing if those ranks changed, we can also catch up with some of the books that we missed after our spells were ranked. But with support from people like you, I am sure it will get done. So, and you are using monster parts as well. So that seems like that is a really popular idea. And again, I just feel like it fits so perfectly in that particular world. Guitar Guy Nick says, hi, nice last call. I'm looking to run Kingmaker soon. I'm struggling between deciding on XP or milestone for level progression. Which would you suggest? Great question. In my personal opinion, it depends what you want to reward or encourage in your Kingmaker game. When you tell players XP, this is what you get XP for. You get XP for finding treasure. You get that's original first edition AD&D did that. It said, hey, when you find treasure and gold, you get experience points. If you do other stuff, you don't really get that much experience points. But if you find treasure and you find gold, you get experience points. That means that characters are going to, in that campaign, are going to go, I want to find treasure. I want to find gold. And that is what's going to motivate them. What gets rewarded gets repeated. When you give characters milestones, what you are telling them, because I mean, fundamentally, we're all here to play the game. We're here to experience the story beats. We're here to explore our characters. And to a certain extent, we're here to level up. I mean, that's why we play D20 level-based games. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I like leveling up, actually, a lot. In fact, one of my biggest gripes is when I play in a campaign and I don't level up enough. I like the sense of progression that comes with leveling up. It's a great way for me to sort of reflect how my character is changing as the game is going on mechanically, and I like that. If you use milestone, though, you are telling your characters that the only way to progress in the campaign is to go through the precise pathways or doorways that you intend them to go through. You could go out, you guys could explore the entire forest. You could go down into the river valley and make friends with all of the troll people and whatever. But none of that will matter until your characters reach this certain milestone. Now, the other side of this, some GMs, when they say milestone, they actually mean GM fiat, which is, I'll level them up when it feels appropriate. And that's fine too, but realize that you're not giving your characters anything to be motivated about, because all that's saying is think about like the reward cycle of that. We go, I guess we just play and we do stuff, and eventually someday the GM will decide we've been good boys and girls and give us a level. It really, in my opinion, loses some of the fun of RPGs, where as a character, as a player, you can sort of say, I want to do this and I want to do that because of this reward or that reward. This is a long way of saying, I think you should use XP, and I think you should be very upright and forthright about what you reward XP for. I think rewarding XP for exploration, diplomacy, building new elements to your kingdom. When you what you reward, that behavior will get repeated, right? So figure out what are the things that I want my players to do, and then just create a XP system that rewards them with experience points when they do that thing. And then you can just take your hands off, and it sort of kind of takes care of itself, right? So yeah, I agree with Xyz. I think XP lends itself better to sandbox as well. Yes, it sounds even more painful. Now, listen, all I was simply saying is that, like, as a purist, as an analyst, that is what I should be doing. And Wojo, I'm going to give you a strong salute. Actually, I'm going to give you a Satan's game on that one.
Dungeons and Dragons, Satan's game.
Because that is definitely the case. There shouldn't even be that much to do. It's bikes. Okay. Ikes. All right. I'll just call you Ikes. Endogenous versus exogenous reward structures in games discussed. Dan, you're trying to get us completely off topic here, but that is what we do here on Night's Last Call, huh? Derek would hate playing one of my games then. I hate PCs leveling too quickly. 1 level per 4 or 5 sessions is a good rate, in my opinion. That said, we mostly use XP levels, so it doesn't always work out that way. All right. It's made up name. All right, cool. Yeah, I don't know that I would hate it. I mean, if the game's fun and good, I don't really compare it. I don't care too much. Shadram uses milestones for their homebrew, but set multiple goals and options and tell them what will give them a level. Those goals are based on their choices. That's fine too. I think that kind of is still embracing the idea of what gets rewarded gets repeated. So I think that's fine. I just don't like tracking how many encounters I need to put in a dungeon to not have them out level stuff, etc. Now, that is where we get a little bit off topic. I think in a sandbox game, I think in what I would call a normal campaign, but what everybody else would call a sandbox campaign, I think them out leveling stuff or being under leveled for stuff is fine. I think it's kind of cool, actually. I know that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a little tough with that because of the way that the level works, but unless your characters are like, 27 things deep, my level 3 characters should be level 7. Okay, that's going to be a problem. But, if your characters are a little bit under level and they go fight they're level 3, they should be level 4, but they're not, they fight some stuff, I think that's fine. I think that's fun. It shows the characters that the choices they make or don't make matter. And I kind of like that. I think I read your member chat, Damien, earlier. I may have missed. I think I got it. That is true, Shadram. Forbidden Lands would probably be better for that. All right. So, in order to sort of, keep this relevant, or useful, I want to talk a little bit about weapons. We'll start. You know what? Yeah, we'll start with weapons. Weapons are kind of a big topic and point of contention sometimes these days. So let me bring up my boom, there we go. Okay. All right. I am just pulling up some item stuff. All right. Whiteboard down. PDF viewer up. All right, there we go. Boom. PDF. All right. So here we have the items that define our weapon properties, runes. Now remember, as we said in our whiteboard, that you are going to be looking at, after you pick up your first potency item, to pick up an item or a property rune, because you can have one on your item. And after you get your second potency rune at level 10, you're going to be looking to pick up a second. And then once you pick up your third potency bonus at level 16, you're very, very quickly going to be looking to put in a third. So the question for weapons and runes is, which should you put in? But to discuss that, we first have to discuss weapons. Now, I have not made it I've not made it unknown that I think that Pathfinder 2nd Edition has way too many weapons. And the answer, it most certainly does. There are 304 base weapons in this game, which is just an outrageous amount by, any stretch of the imagination. And so I really don't feel like the game really needs this many weapons, but we have them all anyways. That being said, there are several things that you should take into account when you are thinking about what weapon you should be using. Obviously, a certain part of it is your character's concept and idea. And I do think that for the most part, most of the weapons are fairly similar in certain aspects. But that being said, there are several critical and key ideas. So the first is, some weapons are simple and some weapons are martial. And by and large, 9 times out of 10, the martial weapons, I would say probably like 14 times out of 15, the martial weapons are stronger than the simple weapons, as one might expect. They are typically going to have better traits, better damage than the simple weapons. Similarly, there's also advanced weapons, but advanced weapons typically require access through some sort of feat or some sort of additional price that you have to pay. Sometimes it comes from an ancestry and you get it for free, which isn't the worst thing in the world. And not every advanced weapon is necessarily an automatic grand slam home run winner. Some, in very certain circumstances, can be very powerful. All right. Now, despite all of these weapons, most of the time I feel like they are just making weapons in this game so that they can fill up space and put a filler. So there's a lot of garbage, I would say, a lot of nonsense in the book. But there is a couple of considerations that you want to make. And one of the big ones is, what type of weapon is it? So when you look at your weapon, weapons will fall into different categories: axe, bomb, bow, brawling, club, dart, firearm, flail, hammer, knife, pick, polearm, shield, sling, spear, sword. Now, by and large, this doesn't matter. And you can see all of the different weapons that this group represents. These are all the axes in our game. These are all of the bows. These are all the clubs. Here are all the firearms, okay? All the links. You can see that some categories have quite a few weapons. Knife has quite a few. Sword has a lot. And some don't have as many. By and large, the only difference between these weapons is just, or the weapon groups, is some combination of things. Hammers, for example, and flails are bludgeoning damage, or tend to be bludgeoning damage. Swords tend to be slashing or piercing damage, but there's no particular difference between them in that regard. But what does have a huge difference in the game is the type of weapon that you have and its critical specialization effect. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the woods here, but this is combat and tactics. By and large, Pathfinder 2nd Edition is a game about getting critical hits. It is a game where each time you attack on your turn, your accuracy goes down considerably. -5 due to multiple attack penalty. -10 due to multiple attack penalty. And even with certain traits like agile, going -4, -8 is still a very significant decrease in your ability to produce not just hitting, but critting. So as a result, the game is structured in such a way that it really behooves you to sort of make your attack bonus as high as you possibly can for one big, nice attack roll that hopefully will critically hit. Because a critical hit is more than just, it doubles the damage, right? So you might think a critical hit is worth 2 regular hits, but it's not. It's worth more than that. And as we start talking about the runes for our weapons later, you'll realize is that critical hits in Pathfinder 2nd Edition not only do double damage, which already makes it worth at least as many as 2 hits, it also gives you critical specialization effects from the type of weapon it is and from the type of magical runes that are on said weapon. And so characters come into their critical specialization effects fairly early in the game. Most of your mainline martial characters that are fighting and using weapons get them at level 5. Although there are some instances in the game where people can get their critical specialization effects early. I think is the ruffian rogue, I think, can get their critical specialization effect at level 1, I think. So pretty cool stuff. Critical specialization effects are, by and large, very, very, very unbalanced, okay? Some of them are really, really good, and some of them are really, really bad. So what I want to do is spend a few moments talking about some of the good ones and some of the not so good ones, all right? So let's start with the 2 that are easily the strongest in the game, to the point where I would argue that they are broken, and that if you want to be any sort of effective character in the game, you should probably be using a flail or a hammer. And the reason is because when you critically hit with a hammer or a flail weapon, then, which is any of these linked items here that are in this list, the creature that you're targeting is knocked prone. Now, this does not matter. The creature could be a 1,000-foot tall statue made of titanium that has 257 legs. If you critically hit it with a hammer or a flail, it is knocked prone. Now, the rumor is that these are going to be nerfed in Pathfinder Remastered, and they will likely be nerfed in the sense that the character or the monster or the foe that you critically strike with them will get a saving throw, probably a fortitude saving throw. And if they do that, flail and hammer will still almost certainly be probably the best weapon types. So that is saying a lot. I mean, it'll definitely be more in line with the other types, but that just shows you how broken these things are right now. And you know, for your money, it is pretty much, you know, I know that there's a lot of characters out there in the game who use a maul or a warhammer. Maul if you want the 2-handed weapon, warhammer which does D12, and warhammer if you want the 1-handed weapon that does D8. We've talked about this on other combat and tactics, but prone is just such a unbelievably powerful condition. It makes the enemy flat-footed. It makes the enemy have a -2 penalty to attack rolls. It makes the character basically kind of immobilized. They're not really able to move around that well other than by crawling. They have to spend an action to stand up. Doing so triggers reactions like reactive strike / attack of opportunity. So it eats up a lot of actions. It's a very powerful debuff on both the character's, the person's offensive capability and their defensive capability. And in this case, it is applied automatically. Now, let's contrast that with sword. Because when you critically hit with a sword, they're knocked out. Nothing hurts me more than swords in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, because the sword is I get it. In real warfare, spear was king, right? I'm talking about real, medieval Renaissance era war. Spear was king, or even like things like maces or pole arms, right? Things with reach were just like the weapons of the battlefield. But this is fantasy. This is high fantasy. This is power fantasy. This is Wayne Reynolds artwork, okay? Swords are what fantasy games are all about. And it just makes me so sad that swords, by and large, are fairly bad in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I hate to say it. Number one, I don't understand why critically hitting with a sword makes people become flat-footed. It knocks them off balance? That's not what a sword does. If you critically hit, like if somebody said, oh, if you hit them with your flail or their hammer, they're made off balance by their attack. Maybe if they're critically hit by your brawling, your fists, they're knocked off balance by your attack. But when you're critically hit with a sword, I'm not envisioning you being knocked off balance. I'm envisioning you getting fucking a sword shoved through your thigh or through your chest. I think swords should just be like, doing extra damage or being just brutalizing your character. But anyways, I stand corrected. But swords make the character make the target off balance, becoming flat-footed until the start of your next turn. So a couple of things here. When you knock them prone, they're flat-footed, and they get a -2 penalty to their attack roll, and they have to spend an action to stand up, and that triggers attacks of opportunity. So flail and hammer are just everything that this does and more. Making the character just become flat-footed until the start of your next turn means that, number one, you won't even benefit from it next turn. You yourself, the person who crit them. Number two, making a character flat-footed is fairly easy to do in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. All you have to do is flank, It's pretty simple. So a lot of times, most of the time, a character or a monster is going to be flat-footed anyways. So the fact that you made it flat-footed through your sword attack doesn't even do anything, right? About the only thing that the sword does is it makes the target flat-footed, even to, say, your ranged allies or your spellcaster allies who normally don't get to benefit from the flat-footed from flank. But again, prone does that too. So, so hammer and flail still just really crush swords. By and large, the critical specialization effect of sword is not that great. Somehow, spear might almost be worse. It makes them clumsy 1 until the start of your next turn, which is a -1 status penalty to their armor class, which, to be fair, stacks with flat-footed. So there is something to be said about the spear causing people to become an additional point of armor class, right? Clumsy is a status bonus, or I should say a status penalty. Flat-footed is a circumstance penalty. So those two things stack. But that being said, this doesn't even give them 2 points of armor class reduction. Flat-footed does, prone does, but spear only gives them 1 point. And again, it lasts until the start of the turn. But at least spear has no save and potentially could stack with flat-footed. Now, there's a bunch of them in the game, which we'll kind of cover here quickly. Sling. They have to make a fort save or be stunned 1. All right. What's the other one? The other one is, firearm. They have to make a fort save against your class DC or be stunned 1. And the other one is brawling. They must make a fort save against your DC or be slowed 1. Now, here's the deal. Slowing your target or stunning your target is actually really quite good. Stun is really, really good because when a creature is stunned, they do not get reactions. So if you can land this, it's pretty dang good. They do get a fort save, which again, I understand that Hammer and Flail don't have that, but they will have that in the future. I think that even though they do get a save against this, stunning and slowing are pretty dang nice things to throw onto a monster. And again, stun is a little bit better. It's really funny to me that a firearm, if you critically hit someone with a firearm, they could be stunned. That makes total sense. But if you critically hit somebody with a sling stone, it's the same effect. So sling stones and firearms do the same thing on a critical hit. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But I don't know how many people are out there using slings. But I do think that sling and brawling and firearm are all really nice critical hit effects. And I think that they're worth kind of looking into. That being said, there's quite a few of them, like club, which pushes a person 10 feet. Polearm, which pushes them 5 feet of your direction of your choice. Shield, which pushes the character 5 feet. Most of the time, I feel like that's not actually that great. Yes, there is a world where you push the target back, and then on their turn, they have to spend an action to try to re-engage with you. But most of the time, all you're doing when you knock a target back is probably messing up your buddy's flank. You might be denying yourself the ability to make a follow-up attack because now they're out of your reach and you can't even hit them. Or if you push the target away from you, now the creature's free. Maybe you had attack of opportunity. Now the creature's not even threatened by you. So it's free to just walk around you and go kill your wizard. I don't really love any of the pushing weapons. Polearm has the chance that it might be okay because you could maybe move them in closer to you, which could be a thing from time to time. But this is a critical hit we're talking about. It feels like it should just be a bigger, badder, more meaningful effect than it is. So I don't really love those. The knife makes them take 1d6 persistent bleed damage. That means they take 1d6 damage at the end of their turn. They make a DC 15 flat check. If they pass that, then they're no longer bleeding. Otherwise, they continue to take the bleeding damage. You get an item bonus to this bleed damage equal to the weapon's item bonus to attack rolls. That means at the end of the game, when your character is like level 18 or 17, and you have a +3 knife, and you critically hit somebody, they're going to take 1d6 plus 3 damage instead of 1d6 persistent bleed damage. Knife, along with the other one that makes you bleed. That's the other one that makes you bleed. Dart are both actually kind of relevant, pretty good at low level, where 1d6 persistent bleed damage is actually a good percentage of the characters that you're fighting's hit points. By the time your character is level 3 or 4 or 5, this damage quickly becomes fairly unimportant. And by the time your character's level 10 or 11 or 12 and you're fighting monsters that literally have 150 or 200 hit points, them taking 2 or 3 points of bleed damage every round is like a rounding error. It really does not matter. So, dart and knife is one of those critical hits that matters in the early game and then becomes meaningless as the game, goes into its final, last 14 levels or so of the game. Once you pass level 6, it's like the damage is so meaningless it doesn't actually matter that much. And then the last one, there's bomb, which just makes it a bigger splash radius, which is fine. I mean, it could be good, I suppose. The last two that we have are axe and pick. And we'll get into this when we get into axes, but I feel like picks and axes should have been completely switched in this game. But picks do an additional 2 points of damage per weapon die. That means it does, when you critically hit, they take 2 extra damage, or if you have a striking rune, they take 4 extra damage. If you have a greater striking rune, they take 6. If they have a major striking rune, they take 8 points of additional damage. It's not a ton, and remember, that doesn't get doubled because it comes in after the critical hit, but it is something. Axe is horrible. Basically, if a creature is exactly adjacent to your creature, then they take the amount of damage equal to the weapon die roll, but it's not doubled from the critical hit. And so basically, you kind of get a really, really, really weak a hit against an additional monster if they happen to be standing right next to each other. Axes in Pathfinder Tekken Edition should be splitting people open, not carving into the person next to them. That's not even what axes do. In real life, axes, they chop into something, they get stuck in there. They don't slice through and then chop into the next thing that's adjacent to it. It doesn't even make sense why axes do this. Axes should be, massive damage critical hit. That's why we use axes for execution, or well, we don't do that anymore, but that's why we used to do it. So again, I think when you're making your weapon choice, really think about the critical specialization effect. Think about some of them are better than others, and critical hits are very important to Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Secondly, if you're going to use a two-handed weapon, then it should either do D12 damage, like a maul, say, or greatsword, or it should do D10 damage and have really, really good traits. What are good traits? Reach is a good trait. Agile is a good trait. Grapple is a good trait. Finesse, if your character cares about it, is a good trait. Fatal is a good trait. Deadly is a good trait. Everything else is kind of, who cares? Yes, sweep and backswing, and there's a million other ones that occasionally might give you a random +1 to bonus to attack roll on your second attack after you've already missed. But it's such a minor difference that comes up so infrequently. I really, really wouldn't worry about it. But if you're using a two-handed weapon, it should either be D12 damage, or if it's going to be D10 damage, it should have good traits like reach and agile and some of the other ones that I listed. Similarly, if you're going to use a one-handed weapon, it should do D8 damage. And the only reason you should be using D6 damage is, again, if it has really, really good traits that really work well with the character that you are, using. Really think twice before you pick anything else. And I'm curious, if people have questions about this, but, long story. Again, there's 305 weapons. We're not going to go through all of them, but needless to say, I really think that you need to think twice about that. Because again, most of these things are just a bunch of traits all stacked onto one thing. And it's just, it's very messy. And so it doesn't make a whole bunch of difference here. All right. It's already 8:20. So I want to talk about property runes on your weapons, at least. Let's see here. Just looking for my. Okay. So, when we talk about weapon property runes, remember, like I said, that when your character gets a +1 bonus on a weapon, you could put 1 weapon property rune on it. And when it has 2, you could put 2 runes. And when you have 3, you could put 3 runes. Here are the 75 property runes in the game. They have a level, suggesting their price, but the level doesn't really matter for what you can put into your weapon or not. In theory, if you were level 3 and you had a +1 longsword, you could take this level 16 speed rune and put it into your weapon. It would work just the same, right? Yeah, again, Robert, polearm is one of those instances where I think it's fine for a character to sacrifice some damage if you're gaining a lot of really great traits like reach and some of the other things that come with being, having a polearm. Reach, grapple, maybe, stuff like that. All of the range trip, reach trip, I should say. So there could be many of instances where it could be worth it to give up the damage die. But just understand, how does this weapon fit my character's concept and what they're trying to do? If your character is trying to do a bunch of damage, well, you should probably pick a D8 or D12 damage weapon if you have a two-handed weapon. If your character isn't trying to do a lot of damage, then maybe pick other traits that help you and affect you in that way. So here are the property runes that we have in the game. And we can see here that most of them can be etched into a weapon, but some of them specifically specify that they can only be used on a melee weapon. And some of them might even say that they can only be etched into a bludgeoning weapon. So what I want to do before we get into this is I want to sort of write, or at least kind of have my thought on what are the best ones in the game and at what levels. And of course, not all of these, you would never want to have all of these at once, but you might have, some, you might have some, but not all. So crushing, fearsome, rooting, the elemental runes, which we'll talk about later. In certain instances, we have greater versions of these runes, like crushing, fearsome, ashen, which is completely broken and probably shouldn't be allowed in the game. Brilliant, speed. And to me, these are the best weapon runes in the game. Now, why is that? Well, it's for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about. But if it's a weapon rune, you're using your weapon to hopefully kill something. And that means doing extra damage, or it means debilitating or debuffing that monster to make it easier for your allies and yourself to take them out. All of these runes add into that sort of idea or concept. Secondly, as I said before, and this is just my personal take and maybe the take of 50 or 100 or 200 other of my fellow close patrons, Pathfinder 2 is a game about critically hitting. And most of these runes, which we're going to talk about here, either have an effect that is powerful or have an effect that is added when you critically hit. So that means that these runes sort of play into the critical hit mentality of the game. And there are some runes, like elemental runes, which do both, right? They're good when you're not critting, and they're good when you crit. So they're real nice. And in fact, you could do a lot worse in the game than just taking 3 elemental runes and calling it a day. Frost, lightning, frost, fire, and thundering, and you'd be probably pretty set. In fact, one of the things that you should be asking yourself is, assume baseline, I'm going to have 3 elemental runes in my weapon just to add the most damage. Which ones am I willing to swap out to get a particularly additional effect? Now, Nin mentions the extending rune, and I do agree. I do think it is underrated. I think the extending rune is great. Nin, I had an extending rune on a backup weapon on my 20th level or very high level Pathfinder 2 fighter in the last campaign that I played in, because most of the time I wasn't going to need it, but when I did need it, it was nice to have sort of in my back pocket. But at the same time, it wasn't the type of rune that I wanted to have on my weapon, 24/7, because most of the time, quite frankly, I didn't need it. And by the time you get like extending and greater extending, usually, at least I did, your characters have ability to fly, your characters have ability to teleport. And so some of the requirement of extending rune does dissipate. But I do think you're right. I think extending rune is a good rune, and I don't hate it. In fact, there's a couple of runes, which I'm going to talk about, Nin, that I think are good. They're just, and in fact, I would argue they're actually insane. They're just pretty specific, and so they don't get enough, bang for their buck for me. All right. So starters off, we're low level. Okay. We've just picked up our first +1 potency rune at level 2. And now we are looking to figure out what weapon or what rune do we want to put onto our, onto our cool weapon. All right. So obviously we're like in the first, levels here, like levels 3, 4, 5, 6. So what are our options? Well, we have runes like returning, which lets a thrown weapon return to you automatically, which is cute, but not really something that we need to worry about. Throwing is not really the best thing to be doing anyways. But very early on, there are a couple of very strong runes. And one of them is probably one of the most, one of the strongest runes in the game. And that is crushing. Okay. And crushing can only be put onto a bludgeoning weapon. Conveniently, hammers and flails are bludgeoning weapons. Crushing, when you critically hit a foe, they become clumsy 1. Remember that clumsy gives you a -1 status penalty to your armor class. And it gives you a -1 status penalty to your reflex saves. It also makes them enfeebled 1, which, remember, gives them a -1 status penalty to their attack rolls, or I should say strength-based attack rolls, which is most attack rolls, and a -1 penalty to their damage rolls. This means that if you have a crushing rune on your bludgeoning hammer or flail, and you critically hit someone, they will automatically, with no save, be knocked prone, which gives them a -2 penalty to attack rolls and a -2 penalty to their armor class, circumstance both. And they will become clumsy 1 and enfeebled 1, which gives them an additional -1 penalty to their attack rolls and their armor class, which is a status, which means it stacks, which means you give a creature -3 to hit and -3 to armor class for no save. And that's at level 3. Obviously, you need to be like probably level 5 before you can really make the most use of it, because you want to have the critical effect from your hammer. But this effect and its bigger brother, which is greater crushing, which is available at level 9, which is insanely early, which increases the penalty to clumsy 2 and enfeebled 2. This means at level 9 with a crushing rune on a hammer or a flail, when you crit a creature, they will be at -4 penalty to attack, and they will be at -4 penalty to their armor class. Think about your monster's AC dropping by 4 points with no save. It is extremely important, extremely powerful. It's one of the go-to runes out of Northern Reaches. And by the way, contrast this with the sword and all that other stuff from the critical specialization effects, right? Sword, if you remember, when you critically hit with a sword, they are flat-footed until the start of your next turn, which means that the next turn that you get after you critically hit with a sword, you don't even get the benefit of them being flat-footed. But look at the crushing rune. It's until the end of your next turn. That means if you critically hit them with your crushing rune on chat 1, all right, in round 1, when you get your turn again next turn, they will still be clumsy and enfeebled, which means you get to like benefit from your own debuff that you put on the monster. Guess what? Their now armor class is lower, so you're more likely to crit, which means you're more likely to make them prone again and to reinflict this enfeebled and clumsy. Now, Damien did bring up a good point, as he often does. You'll note I also included on this chart some of the rarity restrictions. Now, most of these are common, but a handful of them are uncommon. I don't particularly know why the crushing rune is uncommon, but it is. And there's even one on there that is rare. which is the speed rune. So be aware that some GMs might not be about the crushing rune, which is unfortunate, but that's all right. If they won't let you have the crushing rune, there's a really, 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 really close second place available just a few levels later, which potentially could even be more powerful in certain circumstances, which is the fearsome rune. Now, Nin is talking about the Phantasmal Doorknob. Yes, Phantasmal Doorknob number 1 is a poorly written item that should not exist. And it was obviously written by somebody who doesn't know how the game works, and or it was a mistake and it got let through editing, and I don't know why it's still in the game. But technically, Nin, that is a spell heart, not a property rune. So we will cover that when we cover spell hearts. All right. So crushing rune is great, but if we can wait, or maybe our GM says we're not allowed to have it, then another great option is fearsome. Now, fearsome is kind of what we used to take all the time before Crushing came out. Crushing came out in Grand Bazaar. So for the first 2 years of the game, fearsome rune was basically the best that you got. So what does a fearsome rune do? Well, guess what? It makes them frightened. And if you get the greater one at level 12, they become frightened too. Now, here's why I say that this could be better. Because frightened, or I should say, or worse. Now, frightened, remember, frightened 1, frightened 2, give you a -1 or -2, depending if you're frightened 1 or frightened 2, status penalty to damn near everything in the game. You get a -1 penalty to your attack rolls. You get a -1 penalty to your armor class, your fort save, your reflex save, your will save, all of your skill checks. Your spell DCs are lowered by 1. Your spell attack roll is lowered by 1. So when you are frightened, this is actually a more universal, more powerful effect than simply being clumsy or enfeebled, which is just specifically to dexterity and armor class and strength and attack roll. The downside is that the fearsome rune does have a couple of traits which kind of hurt it, which is that the fearsome rune has the emotion trait, the enchantment trait, the fear trait, and the mental trait. And that means that if the monster that you're hitting with your fearsome rune is immune to effects from these traits, they are also immune to being affected by the frightened. Whereas if you crush somebody with your crushing rune, they're pretty much on the ground, enfeebled and clumsy. The fearsome rune, on the other hand, you will encounter monsters which are immune to some or all of these traits, making them immune to the fear effect. But I still think it's a very, very powerful effect, and I'll tell you why. Number 1, remember that Frightened 1 will go away at the end of the monster's turn, whereas Frightened 2 will take 2 turns to burn off, right? They'll be Frightened 2 for the first round, and then they'll be Frightened 1 for the second round. So you get a little bit more of a duration out of the fearsome, especially the Frightened 2. The second reason is because there are certain abilities in the game, there's armor in the game, that play off of the frightened effect, that can make the frightened effect be more persistent. There's a type of armor called the rune, called the Dread rune, which make frightened effects not go away. And that means that you could potentially leave this debuff on the monster for much longer. Also, perhaps most importantly, the fearsome rune can go onto any melee weapon. It doesn't have to be a bludgeoning weapon. So the crushing rune can only go on a bludgeoning weapon, but it is uncommon. And so that is something that you should, take into account. Now, real quick, while we're in here in these sort of early levels, I do want to bring up some things like Ghost Touch and Disrupting. Now, Ghost Touch and Disrupting, I think, are both excellent runes. I mean, if you fight an incorporeal monster and you do not have a Ghost Touch weapon, you're going to feel it. You're going to notice it. The problem is incorporeal monsters are either going to come up a lot or they're never going to come up much at all. If you're playing Abomination Vaults, you probably might want to pick up a Ghost Touch weapon. The other thing that makes Ghost Touch not great is there are ways in the game through spells and other abilities like the Barbarian's Spiritist Barbarian's Rage or certain spells that can grant weapons temporarily the Ghost Touch property. Remember, you only get 3 slots of runes on your weapon, and you really want to get the biggest bang for your buck. Now, I don't think it's a horrible idea as you get higher level in the game to maybe have a backup weapon that has a Ghost Touch rune on it, just in case you come across in some incorporeal monsters, you can pull it out. Or if you're playing a campaign where you fight a bunch of ghosts and ghouls and poltergeists, it could be worth having. But it is very effective at what it does. It's just super, super niche. The same thing is true of disrupting. This is an early weapon that does D6 positive damage to undead. Doing a D6 positive damage to undead sounds great. D6 damage is awesome. But remember, a lot of undead have weakness to positive damage. And that means that you could potentially do 5 or 10 extra points of damage with your disrupting rune. But again, disrupting, just like Ghost Touch, number 1, is very niche. It only works against undead. And number 2, there are other ways in the game to get the disrupting effect. There are spells that can grant weapons the disrupting effect. And as Nin pointed out here, there is also a spell heart that can grant you the disrupting effect. So long story short is, while I think that Ghost Touch and Ghost Touch and disrupting are cool, ultimately I do not feel like they are that they don't come up often enough for it to be worth your time. And as we sort of look, and remember, if we look at our chart here, we got our potency rune at level 2, and then at level 4, we get our greater striking rune. And then at level 5, we get our armor rune. So sometime around level 6, 7, or 8, we want to be looking to try to put a property rune into our weapon. Now, if we have a bludgeoning weapon, this is pretty easy. We should try to get that crushing rune in there ASAP. If your GM doesn't allow crushing runes, or if you're using a not bludgeoning weapon, the fearsome rune, I think, is a good choice as well. But I also think that you wouldn't be mistaken if you wanted to take a look and wait a little bit higher until you're maybe more like level 7 or 8 or 9 and pick up rooting or elemental. And these kind of represent 2 different ways of thinking about the way that your character is using their weapon and thinking about the way that your character is approaching the game. So rooting is a fantastic melee only weapon, which when you critically hit with your weapon, the target is immobilized for 1 round. No save, they're just immobilized. So rooting isn't going to add any additional damage. What rooting is going to do is rooting is going to make your character a little bit more of a controller, a little bit more of a disruptor, a little bit more of a support character. When you critically hit with a rooting weapon, the target becomes immobilized for 1 round and clumsy 1 as long as the immobilization lasts. So not only are you preventing that monster or that foe from moving for a round, but you're also lowering their armor class for your entire allies. By the way, the immobilization will only last 1 round, so it's not like they're stuck in place forever. But on that monster's turn, if they don't want to just spend the entire round stuck where they are, they have to try to escape. Now, part of the problem in this game is certain weapons and certain magical items and certain runes have what we call a static DC. In other words, when you pick up rooting at level 7, the DC to escape from your rooting effect is DC 23. But that doesn't scale, not automatically. And that means that by the time your character is level 8 or 9 or 10, the DC for the monsters to escape is still 23, but by now it's a joke. And so unless you want to keep investing into the rooting, like by taking a greater rooting, major rooting, or true rooting, the DC is going to become almost trivial. But honestly, this is one of those situations where I don't think if you're going to take rooting, unless you really, 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 really want to lean into the controlling elements, I don't think that you necessarily have to be worried about upgrading this rune every single time it becomes available. Why? Because if the target is immobilized, their turn comes, they've got 3 actions, and they've got a choice to make. The GM has a choice to make. Number 1, if there's a PC next to me, I could always just attack them. Now, that might be a champion or a heavily armored fighter, something that I don't want to attack, but I could attack it and not have any problems with it. Okay? So that's option number one. Option number two is maybe there's no one near me, or maybe I don't want to attack the champion with their shield raised. I want to go attack the rogue, or I want to go attack the gunslinger. So I do want to leave. So I'm going to make this escape check, which maybe is trivially easy. My monster has to roll a 3 or higher to escape. That's fine though, because of two things. Remember, number one, you're still eating up an action, which means that the monster is, especially if it's higher level than you, that every action counts. Number two, if they are escaping, even if the DC is completely trivial, it has multiple attack penalty. Escape action has the attack trait. And that means that when that monster escapes, its multiple attack penalty goes from 0 to -5. Which means that even if you immobilize the creature and the monster says, I'm not going to stand here and fight you, champion, I'm going to go attack the rogue, then they have to burn an action just to escape. And that increases their multiple attack penalty from 0 to -5, which means that, the creature is much less likely to hit less likely to hit and much less likely to critically hit your companion. So job still well done. The point is that disruption came regardless of what the DC for the escape was. So I don't think you should prioritize necessarily increasing this as much. The other option that we have at level 8 is the elemental runes. Corrosive for acid damage, flaming for fire damage, frost for cold damage, shock for lightning damage, and thundering for sonic damage. Now, I could tell you that any or all of these are fine choices, but that is not necessarily true. And the reason why that is not true is because there are many different types of resistances in this game. Okay? And we've used this before. This is a list of how many creatures in the game are resistant or immune or weak, in other words, vulnerable, taking extra damage, to each of the different damage types. Now, right off the bat, you can see that fire has the most creatures that are weak to it and the most creatures that are resistant to it and immune to it. So you might think that fire is a bad choice. But I don't necessarily know that that is the case, because the way I think of it is this. When you take an elemental rune, like flaming, a flaming rune is going to add D6 points of additional fire damage on every successful strike that you deal. And if you do a critical hit, it'll give that creature ongoing D10 persistent fire damage. It's all great. But this means that you're going to be doing 3 to 4 points of additional fire damage every time you hit a monster. Now, if you do run across one of the monsters that is immune to fire or resistant to fire, it means that your character is going to miss out on 3 or 4 points of fire damage every time they attack. So that 3 or 4 gets reduced to 0. So you're losing out on -3. But if you fight one of the 105 creatures that is weak to fire, they might have weakness 5, weakness 10, weakness 15. Then not only are you going to get to do your 3 or 4 points of fire damage, you're going to be adding 5, 10, or 15 points of weakness bonus damage as well. And so I think that the trade-off between losing out on 3 or 4 points of fire, but potentially gaining 15 or 16 points of weak fire is worth it. Additionally, the critical hit effect of flaming is really good. D10 persistent fire damage is pretty nice. At that level, that's 5.5 points of fire damage that might last, 2 or 3 rounds. You're looking at, 15 points, 10 to 15 points of additional damage. That is pretty good investment. So flaming, even though it is the resistant that is the most immune and most resist, the way that weaknesses work in the game and the amount of damage that this is doing means that I think flaming is a really, really solid choice. The next solid choice that I like is frost. And the reason I like frost is because it does cold damage. And as we can see here, cold is there's not as many creatures that are weak to it. There's not as many creatures resistant or immune to it, but it's still a lot of creatures that are going to come up. So it's just like the fire, but it's going to happen less often, because there's still a lot of monsters that are weak and there's still a lot of monsters that are resistant to it. So you might lose out on 2 or 3 points of cold damage, but you're going to gain 64 instances where you do a lot more damage. And to be clear, unlike with fire, there's much less creatures available that have cold immunity, resistance, or weakness. But what frost does pick up is on a critical hit, you slow the target unless it makes a DC 24 fort save. Now, again, this is one of those static DCs that we talked about, where if you get this at level 8 or 9, that DC 24 fort save is a nice high DC. You're going to get a lot of people that fail that. If you get to level 10 or 11 or 12 or 13, most creatures are just going to basically auto pass the DC 24 fort save. And then when you get to level 15, you can upgrade your frost rune to the greater frost rune. And once again, the DC is going to jump from 24 to 34. And once again, creatures are going to start failing that save again. And as you get higher in level 16, 17, 18, and then eventually 19, 20, by the time you're level 19 or 20, most creatures are going to basically automatically pass this. But for those 3 to 4 levels around level 8 when you first get the frost rune, or for those 3 to 4 levels around level 15 when you get the greater frost rune, slowing a target, and this does not have the incapacitation trait, is really good. I mean, anytime you can shave off an action, especially from a higher level monster, I mean, it's worth the bite. And you're not giving up anything, right? I mean, this is a critical hit effect. And yeah, they might roll a 3 or a 4 or a 5 or a 6 on their fort save. You might be fighting a monster that doesn't have a particularly great fort save, and then you have an even better chance of hitting them with a slow. But this is so powerful, especially when you think about combining it with some of the other elements that we've talked about in your weapon choice. For example, imagine that you have this frost rune on a hammer. You critically hit with that hammer. The opponent, no save, goes down to the ground. They're prone. -2 to AC from flat-footed. -2 to attack rolls. They have to spend an action just to stand up. But imagine your weapon is also frost, and they fail the fort save. Now they're on the ground and slowed. That means when their turn starts, they only get 2 actions for the whole turn. And if they want to stand up, that's another action. They're left with just a single action to take their entire turn. Your critical hit from your frost weapon has literally put them on ice. And so I think that while fire is nice for pure damage, I think frost has a lot to offer as well. All right. The third rune I want to talk about is thundering. Now, thundering does sonic damage, D6 sonic damage. And I should note, on a critical hit, they have to make a save or be deafened for a minute. Who cares? Deafen basically does nothing in the game. It's kind of like fascinated. It's not really, yes, it does have a mechanical effect. It does matter. But long story short, it doesn't do anything. But the reason why you might want to pick up thundering is because of this chart. There's almost nothing in the game that is immune or resistant or weak to sonic. So sonic, aka thundering, damage is very consistent. There's not going to be a lot of instances where you're going to do extra damage, but they're also not going to be fighting one of the 150 creatures that are immune to your fire damage, or one of the 69 that are immune to your acid, et cetera, right? So there's just not a lot to be gained, or there's not a lot of risk with sonic. Thundering, it's not particularly exciting because, again, the deafening them is not nearly, I mean, let's put these two comparison. Would you rather deafen a foe for a minute at a DC 24 fort save, or would you rather slow a monster for a round at a DC 24 fort save? I think the answer here is pretty clear. So as a result of this chart here, I think that cold, fire, and sonic are great choices. That means that acid, aka our corrosive rune, and what's the other one? Shock our electricity runes. Unfortunately, I feel like these are actually bad choices, which is a shame because the idea of a lightning sword is really, really cool. But there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, we can see here from this chart, there's still a good amount of creatures that are immune and resistant to acid. There's almost nothing that's weak to it. So acid damage is kind of all just downside. And you'll see that electricity is kind of the same. There are 73 creatures that are resistant to electricity and only 13 that are weak to it. Whereas cold and fire, sure, they had a lot of monsters that are immune or resistant, but they also had a lot of monsters that are weak to their attack. The electricity and acid are more often than not going to just be something that the monster's immune or resistant to. So that damage, not great. The other thing, when we do critically hit with this, it doesn't really do much. The corrosive, if the target is wearing armor, then the armor takes 3d6 acid damage before applying hardness. And I should note that a lot of armor in the game, like full plate, has hardness of like 8. So the armor on a crit will take 3d6 acid damage, average of 10, minus the hardness, which is 8. The armor will take like 2 points of damage, and the armor has like 30 hit points. And that's only when a critical hit happens. So this is, and you're fighting against monsters most of the time who aren't wearing armor anyways. The critical hit effect of corrosive does nothing. It's just disappointing. It's kind of pointless. It's a meaningless number calculation, and it's not worth tracking your time. Shock seems like it should be cool, but it's not. When you hit, you do an extra d6 electricity damage. And again, we talked about why electricity damage isn't that great. And if you critically hit, the electricity arcs out and targets 2 creatures within 10 feet of your target. Not with your damage, not with your critical hit damage, with the d6 electricity damage. So you're going to do like 2 or 3 points of damage to maybe up to 2 additional creatures if they are all within 10 feet of the creature that you just critically hit. This is not a really impressive critical hit effect. And again, the immunity and resistance from electricity leaves a lot to be wanting. So I really like fire, cold, and if you want to be safe but boring, you can go with thundering for the sonic. And so definitely thundering, frost, and flaming are great choices. Okay. We're going to make it through the weapons. So at least we did this. We didn't even get to armor, unfortunately. All right. As we move down our list, we can see that some of our runes get upgraded. Crushing, we're not even into our teens yet, and crushing has already gotten an upgrade. This just highlights how unbelievably broken this rune is. It is really good. It's very powerful, and it's a lot of, it's nice to debuff the enemy. So again, if you have a bludgeoning weapon and your GM allows it, you should definitely pick up the greater crushing rune at level 9. And then remember, at around level 10, we're going to get our +2 potency. So that means we're going to have the opportunity to put a second rune into our weapon. And that brings up Ashen at level 9. This rune is a mistake and probably should not be in the game, which is seems to be a repeating theme here. It is uncommon, so again, your GM may not allow it. It's from the High Helm book, and it is a weapon that is coated with a thin layer of ash, which doesn't sound like it should be that powerful, but it is. Hey, Kyle, $30. Thank you. Got to run. Have a good evening. Looking forward to catching up with the VOD tomorrow. Kyle, thank you so much for your incredible support. Appreciate it. Appreciate you for stopping in. Hopefully you enjoy the VOD. If you're watching on the VOD and you have any thoughts, comments, questions about the format that we're doing this for, again, we're probably going to end up having to do, I said we're going to do 3. We might end up having to do 4 or 5 of these just because it is taking me a while to go through all these. But we answered a lot of questions today as well. Let me know how we could structure this format to be a little bit more useful for you. And Kyle, let me know what your thoughts are in a comment. I'd love to hear from you on that. And also, if any of you want to discuss this with me personally, maybe check out our Patreon. We do have a Patreon, Night to Last Call. It's me, it's Bob, it's Aaron. It's my incredible community of amazing gamers who are talking about games, Pathfinder 2, other D20 games, other systems, Call of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu, Powered by the Apocalypse, Blades in the Dark, 2D20. I mean, we have a very, very, very lively community. And while we're only a couple hundred people, our Discord is private. So joining our Patreon at any tier will get you in. And we do have a couple different tiers, which have different options, special bonuses, tickets so that you can get cool merch, buy back issues of our PDFs. Like we have a whole ecosystem set up over there. So it might be worth checking out. Fruitless Endeavor says, it feels like there should be another rune between regular and greater with a DC save of like 28 or 29. Absolutely. And in fact, Fruitless Endeavor, if you look at some of the Treasure Vault, you'll see that a lot of the Treasure Vault or Grand Bazaar weapons or runes will either have 3 or even 4 levels. They'll have like the base rune, and then they'll have a greater, and they'll have a major, and then they'll have a true rune version of the rune. And it's basically just incrementing the DC to keep it relevant. And that's just an example of where, as the game has gone on, Paizo has figured out more and more how their game works, you know? But yeah, I agree with you completely. Nin says, now I want to play a monk with Stunning Fist, a flail monk weapon, and the rooting rune, just for the potential of wasting all 3 enemy actions. Yeah, that would actually be really, really, that's a really cool controlling option. I like the monk class in Pathfinder 2, and I think that is the exact kind of thing that a monk could do that is really, really fun. So I think I do like that. Shadram says, it's weird that the flaming rune deals more dice of damage in its greater version, but no other runes do. Yeah, we didn't really cover the greater runes because technically that happens at later levels. But the damage only increases from the persistent damage. So the base damage is still D6 fire, but the persistent damage from the critical hit goes from D10 to 2D10. Oh, and you realized your mistake. Okay. All right, good. All right. So this is an Ashen rune. This comes from High Helm. It is uncommon. It is very, very powerful and probably should not be allowed. A creature hit by an attack becomes surrounded by ash, which deals D4 persistent damage. Hit, not critically hit. Hit. This is D4 persistent fire damage on every hit that you make with this weapon. Now, D4 doesn't seem like a lot, but you know what? When it's just on a hit, not a critical hit, that's insane. Oh, except there's also this. The ash also clouds the senses, causing the creature to become confused for the round unless it makes a DC 25 will save. This is on hit, not critical hit. This is ongoing persistent fire damage and confusion anytime you hit with this weapon. I don't know what to say other than this is completely broken. Somebody wrote this, did not know how Pathfinder 2 works. Or understand the power of the confusion effect, or the fact that adding persistent damage every time you hit is pretty ridiculous. This is an incredibly powerful rune, and honestly, even I as a GM would have a hard time allowing this in my campaign, just because and not only that, this would get really boring. We haven't talked about this, but one of the things I don't like about Pathfinder 2nd Edition is that you get to a point in the game where when someone like lands a critical hit, like a PC, it might trigger 2 or 3 or 4 saving throws from the monster. This is on every time you hit, not every time you critically hit. So this means you're going to be making so many of these DC 25 will saves, and eventually you will upgrade it to level 16 and they'll be making DC 35 will saves. It's crazy. Shadram, absolutely. They don't even get immunity. It's ongoing. They can just keep stacking this over and over and over and over again. I have no idea what this is doing in the game. Again, I'm not going to beat a dead horse here, but this is the type of thing where I'm like, look, sometimes the editing needs to be a little bit better, a little bit tighter, and they should take a closer look. But if you're a player and you want to be broken as shit and your GM allows it, take the Ashen rune. They'll quickly get upset with it and nerf it. So I guarantee it. So that is the Ashen rune. I thought I would mention it just because it is out there, and it's from High Helm, so it's from a relatively new book. So it's not, it might not be on everybody's radar. Okay. So that brings us now into like level 10, level 11, where we've just picked up our second potency bonus. So now we have 2 positions available on our weapon. And maybe we have our greater crushing rune, or maybe we have an elemental damage rune, or it's possible that we have our rooting rune and we've just upgraded it to the greater rooting rune. Maybe. Again, I don't feel like you have to upgrade the greater rooting rune because the application of the immobilization from rooting is automatic. The only thing that scales is the escape DC, but I kind of don't care if they escape, because if they escape, their multiple attack penalty still goes up, so that's fine. But we can also see that we get some upgrades here from our fearsome, and I will say that you could do a lot worse when you get your second slot than just taking a second elemental rune. If you'll indulge me for a moment, realize that when you are, let's say you're level 11, okay? So you have your +2 striking warhammer, or, longsword, or anything like that. You're going to be doing 2d8 points of damage to it, 1d8 from weapon, 1d8 from the striking rune. You're going to be adding your strength, which is 5, because you now have a 20 strength. And you're going to be adding your weapon specialization bonus damage. Your character is an expert, so their damage bonus is +2. So their total damage that they're dealing with every attack is 2d8 plus 7. Well, realize that if you were to add on, let's say, a flaming and a frost rune, you're adding an additional 2d6 points of damage to every single attack that you make. 2d6 on average is 7. So it's like you're taking your static damage bonus and doubling it, basically. And when you have frost and fire, there's a pretty good chance that the enemy might be weak to one of those. And so they might be taking an extra 5, 8, 10, 12 points of damage. Again, if you're a damage dealing character, especially one that makes a lot of attacks, or uses a lower damage die weapon, if you're using a damage die from your weapon that does like 2d6 instead of 2d8 or 2d12, sometimes I don't think it's a bad idea to just pick up two of these. Okay. And I should also add at this point, yes, Shadram, exactly. And by the way, if you have flaming and frost, look, it doesn't matter. You can freeze somebody with a slow and set them on fire. Okay. So when you crit somebody with this, they're going to be slowed, on fire, prone. Okay. Right. You can see why I said that the game becomes about, stacking onto this idea of critically hitting. And Nin, I do think that there are some runes that compete. I think crushing and fearsome are good. I mean, I think crushing is a little better, but fearsome is good. Crushing is good. I think for controlling purposes, rooting is pretty good. But yeah, the elemental runes are really dang fine. I mean, they are really, really good. Okay. However, at level 12, we do get a kind of a weird rune that kind of sticks out a little bit. And it's a rune that I really, really like. And not a lot of people are aware of it. It is common, but I believe it is from Secrets of Magic. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Brilliant rune. Okay. So if we go ahead and take a look at the Brilliant rune, what we're going to see is a rune that does a lot of things for us. It covers a lot of ground here. All right. It's from Secrets of Magic. I was right. All right. So the weapon becomes a blazing blade of pure energy. Basically, number one, you're turning your weapon into a lightsaber, and that's pretty cool. All right. Number two, it deals D4 points of fire damage on any successful strike. So to put this into comparison, our fire rune was doing D6 points of fire damage. This is doing D4 points of fire damage. Honestly, that is one less point of damage on average. It's almost meaningless. And more importantly, if the monster is immune or resistant to fire, whether I'm doing D6 or D4, it doesn't matter. It's going to 0 anyways. But if the monster's weak to fire, it doesn't matter whether I'm doing D4 or D6. It's going to trigger the weakness, and I'm going to get that extra bonus of 8 or 10 or 15 points of damage. So the Brilliant does the fire damage that the fire rune does. But it has a couple of extra little riders. Number one, it does D4 good damage to fiends and D4 positive damage to undead, kind of just for free. And this is the same situation where we don't really care about the damage. What we care about is that this will trigger weaknesses. A lot of fiends, that's our devils and demons and all those other daemons and all those other types, tend, a lot of them, to have weakness to good damage. And we know that a lot of undead have weakness to positive damage. This kind of just gets tacked on for free. And quite frankly, this is a level 12 rune. As you get higher level into the game, fighting undead and demons and devils can become more popular, more common. And just having this random access to these bonus damage types can be really, really nice. For one rune, okay, let's go back over to our sheet, huh? Look at positive. There are 42 monsters in the game that have weakness to positive damage, all right? And I don't even have good on this. Oh, here we go. Here's good. Yeah, I do have good. There's 166 monsters that are weak to good. So this brilliant rune gives you access to 105 weak fire, 42 weak to positive, and 166 weak to good. That's 313 monsters that are now weak to your damage. That's from one rune, that's from the brilliant rune. If the other rune on your weapon is a cold rune, you are now hitting 377 monsters of weakness. It's a lot. Okay. So, brilliant runes are pretty nice, but we're not done yet. Now, the fire rune does catch them on fire, which is nice. I mean, persistent fire damage, especially D10 or 2D10 persistent fire damage, is a very, very nice, powerful ability. But the brilliant weapon, instead of damage, blinds them. Now, they get to make a fort save, and it is a static save, but we're getting a little bit higher level, so it's not as bad. Admittedly, around level 15 or 16, most creatures are going to pass the save and not be blinded. But then we get to level 18, and we take the new greater brilliant rune, and the DC now goes up to 41, and will probably be pretty good for the rest of the game. But again, there's no immunity to this blind. If you crit them and they become blinded, they get blinded for one round. And then the next round, you could crit them again and blind them for another round. So very, very, very powerful. Blinded is a fantastically powerful debuff to put onto a monster. 50% mischance is no joke, not to mention they're flat-footed to all people that they can't see. And lastly, just totally for flavor, you can dispel darkness. But this is completely a flavor thing and doesn't actually make that much of a difference. So I think Brilliant is really, really, really cool. All right. So I like the flavor of, Fruitless. I love the flavor of this. Plunging your light into the darkness, plunging your blade into the darkness to restore the light. It's totally awesome. But yeah, it's a little unnecessary. Doesn't really do much. So yeah, so I think that Brilliant is a really, really good weapon rune. Now, there's some other runes in here, like Dancing, that historically people think is really cool. It's not really that great in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It takes 2 actions to unleash it. Then you lose your weapon, which means you really can't attack now. So you'd have to pull out another weapon. So you're down in the 3rd action. It attacks, but it doesn't get any benefit from strength. It's really not a great rune. Keen might seem pretty cool. Can only go on a slashing weapon. Basically, now you crit on a 19 or 20. But in my personal opinion, at this level of the game, it's so easy to crit from other ways that giving up one of your runes just to get that extra crit on a 19 probably isn't worth it. The only time I would say Keen is worth it is if your GM really, really likes to throw nothing but super high level bosses at you, because now you can just spam and pray that you roll a 19 or a 20 whenever you're throwing out all of your attacks. So there is that. At level 15, we get into the greater elemental runes, and these basically are everything that we already talked about with the elemental runes. Nothing changes here. They become more powerful, but I will say all 5 of them, Thundering, Shock, Frost, Flaming, they do their damage. This Flaming rune, when it's greater, the fire damage dealt by this weapon ignores the target's fire resistance. What this means is that the table that we were previously looking at here with the damage types, this means now that the 118 creatures which are resistant to fire our fire from our greater flaming weapon is so potent, it burns right through that and damages them anyways, which means basically it's the nuts, right? And just before we think, oh, so what about Brilliant? Does that make Brilliant bad? No, because Brilliant also has a greater version. And the greater Brilliant at level 18, it also, the damage dealt by this weapon ignores the target's fire, good, or positive resistance. So that extra bonus damage that you're dealing is getting through no matter what. So all of the runes really go into overdrive here at the end of the game and become quite powerful. And so it's really interesting to note. All right, so the last rune that we're going to talk about is the rare one, is the speed rune. Now this is rare, so your GM very much may not allow it. But this gives you permanent haste. All right. Whenever you have your speed weapon, you are quickened. Now, normally when you're quickened from haste, you can either take a strike action or a stride action. But with the speed rune, you can only take a strike action. If your party has ready access to haste, you have a lot of spellcasters, a bard, or other support type casters, and you're getting a lot of haste spells cast on you anyways, I wouldn't look into this rune. But if haste doesn't come all that often to your characters, and your GM's fine with giving out a rare rune, I think the speed rune can be very, very powerful and effective, because most of the time, if you're wielding a weapon and you're investing this much money into your weapon, you're probably going to be making at least one strike per turn, and giving the speed weapon can be pretty powerful and potent. That being said, it's not as useful as real haste, and so my suggestion would be, if you can get the real thing, haste, I would do that instead. So what does that mean then for our weapon, or for our situation? Well, it means that if I were putting together my ultimate Pathfinder 2 weapon, my ultimate Pathfinder 2 weapon would look like the following. It would be a +3 major striking. So obviously we're near the end of the game here. And it would either be a Warhammer, if I wanted to use my offhand for something, like a shield or something like that. Or it would be a Maul, if I wanted to do the big D12 damage and just make sure I did the most damage. And what are the 3 runes that I would put onto my weapon? Well, I would probably put on Greater Crushing, Greater Brilliant, and I would put on probably Greater Frost. I'm assuming I'm going to be with a party that's going to be able to cast haste on me, fairly common. Why do I want to do this? Because when I critically hit with this weapon, okay, I am going to knock my target prone. I'm going to make them clumsy 2. I'm going to make them enfeebled 2. I might make them slowed 1, and I might make them blind. I don't need to tell you that that is a lot. That is a lot of effects. In addition, my character is going to do good damage against creatures that are weak to good. It's going to do positive damage against creatures that are weak to positive. It's always going to be doing fire damage, and that'll burn through even creatures that are resistant to fire. And it's always going to be doing frost damage, and that's going to burn or freeze through even creatures that are resistant to cold damage. So that means that I'm as basically as likely as I can be to hit and trigger a weakness. Meanwhile, all of this combines to make a creature -4 to AC, -4 to hit, -2 to reflex saves, to only 2 actions, and they're on the ground, prone, and they're blind. that foe has been properly dealt with. Oh, and if I'm using the Big Daddy Maul here, right? I just hit him for a bunch of damage too. So for me, that is probably the, using, again, the Ashen Rune is probably more powerful, but I'm just assuming that no person in their right mind would ever allow that. So using one uncommon rune and two common runes. One of these is from Grand Bazaar. That's Crushing Rune. One of these is from Secrets of Magic. That's brilliant. And one of these is from the core rulebook. The +3 major striking Maul with a greater Crushing Rune, greater Brilliant Rune, and greater Frost Rune, for me, is probably the most powerful weapon in Pathfinder 2. In a large majority of circumstances. So, and these, once again, are the runes that I think are really, really worth, taking a look at. Again, some of the other runes that we talked about, extending, disrupting, ghost touch, I do think that they have their place. And I do think that they could potentially come in and be helpful and useful in certain circumstances, even returning if you really, really want to be into the throne business. But a lot of the other runes in the game, unfortunately, just don't carry their weight, and although they may be fun and interesting to look at, the fact of the matter is, this is your hard-earned gold from your character, and the fights against these monsters are going to get tougher and tougher and tougher. And, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your party to try to be the most well prepared as you can. Nin, that's a great point. I definitely consider rooting on that weapon. Prone plus immobilize is real good. Yes, Nin, if you wanted to go in a different direction, you could get rid of Greater Brilliant, even though I do love it a lot, and you could replace that with Greater Rooting. And now when you hit somebody, they'll still be -4 to AC. They'll still be -4 to hit. They'll still be -2 to reflex. They'll still be on the ground. They'll still be slowed, but instead of blinded, they'll be immobilized. And that is a horrible situation. And I could think of a lot of situations where immobilized might be better than blind. I could think of situations where blind might be better than immobilized, but I would not fault you if you put that build together. I think that would be a really, really strong weapon, especially on the type of character that's looking to just completely lock somebody down. And so, that'd be a lot of fun. It is a thematic mess that works. Yes, well said. Let's see here. After my table permitted me to recreate the shield sling feat from Pathfinder 1, I put a rune of returning on it, and I regret nothing. You know what? As long as you're having fun with it, Abuelo, I think that's totally fine. Keen was very nice in 3.5, and I have fond memories of many a character that no characters that I ever played, but I know a lot of people who had rapiers. I think had a natural crit range or threat range. It was called threat of 18, 19, 20, and critical keen made that 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, and then improved critical feat made that 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So on a 12 or higher on your D20 roll on a hit, you threatened a critical hit. And that was pretty cool. But Nin, blindness also makes everything difficult terrain for them. Also good point. Yeah. Again, I'm a big fan of the blind condition. I think it's very powerful. It lets you do a lot of crazy, weird things. And it can really mess people up. But I wouldn't fault anybody who wanted. And I like the blindness. It's not like I'm just taking it. It comes out of the greater brilliant rune, which gives us fire, positive, and good, which are, we just saw those are 3 of the most common damage types that trigger weaknesses. And if you've played the game, I mean, thaumaturge, alchemists, like being able to trigger weaknesses is a great way to just chip shot in damage for free. So I really do like the greater brilliant rune for sure. Would the greater version's resistance wording make a flame rune bypass resistance? Yep. Yep, that is exactly right. It would not bypass immunity, Sinister Schism, but it would bypass resistance. Craig, never catch these lives. Love the content. Miss Cleveland. Well, Craig, you know what? It is a beautiful fall day here. Unfortunately, I didn't want to bring this up at the beginning of the stream. My dad's health is not so great. I'm certainly hoping for the best, and definitely appreciate all the support tonight and the fun opportunity to sort of talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition instead of focusing on some of the other stuff here. Obviously, hopes and prayers and all that other good stuff, energy for my family and my dad in particular. He's not the best man in the world, but he's my dad. He's the only one I got. So, I'm rooting for him, and I hope he does all right. So, but he's had some health problems over the last couple of years, and, it does suck when you get older and having to deal with all this stuff. I'm sure y'all have gone through similar things yourself. So in any case, appreciate all the support tonight and getting to just kind of talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So, really appreciate that. So thank you, Craig. I was going to say, it is end of basically fall has arrived. We kind of had our last little bit of heat this week, and it's a cool rainy night outside. Myself, my dad, my sister, my uncle, we're all born September. We're all September babies. So we all just grew up loving the fall. Fall was always such a fun time. And so fall has definitely arrived in Cleveland, and I'm all for it. I'm here for it. Boothby, $5. Thank you. The only loot you need is any good is what the adventure gives you. We'll have to catch up on the VOD later. Yeah. So let me talk about that real quick, Boothby. That is something that, again, we talked about before. If the adventure gives out a bunch of crap loot, okay, that nobody wants to use, I think you're doing your party a little bit of a disservice. You know what I mean? And so I think that, yes, I think part of the fun of the game is making do with what you get. I think there is fun for that. I think giving players maybe runes or magical items that they would not have ideally taken can be a fun part of the game. But I also think that, being able to customize your magical items is an important part of the game as well. And I would simply say that if you are going to give your party a bunch of magical items that the adventurers give them, that's fine because they can sell them. But remember, when they sell them, they only get half the value. That's not the worst thing in the world if they have the ability to have enough downtime to craft, or if you give them extra items on the assumption that they're going to be selling some of them. Either way, don't be stingy. You don't have to be a Monty Hall GM. You don't have to give your characters, absurd amount of gold, absurd amount of magical items. But I do think my sense is Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the adventures and the GMs out there, the adventure paths, I should say, have been pretty stingy with the loot, and not only stingy with the loot, very underwhelming and disappointing and boring with the loot. So I think that this is part of the game. It's part of the game's DNA is getting cool treasure. And I think you owe it to your players and to your character to try to, get some cool stuff going. Not to go off on a tangent here at the end, but one of the things I always talk about is how in the original version of D&D, people go, wow, your character didn't get anything, It's like you didn't have any feats, you didn't have any skills. Your character was just, your fighter literally just got got more hit points every level. That was it. Your attack bonus went up. That's it. That's the only thing you got. There was no feats, there were no skills, there were no powers. So what made your character cool? What made your character cool was their magical items. And I still feel like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there's a lot of duds, but there's also a lot of really cool items that exist out there that you can add to your character, and it's very diegetic, right? It happens in the game world. Sometimes feats can feel a little weird because you're like, what is a feat? I don't understand. But when your character picks up something like a necklace of fireballs or a Qual's feather token or just some fun, quirky, weird item, or you have some boots that let you fly or a cloak that lets you spider climb, and you use it in a really cool moment, or whether it's a combat or exploration scene, like I think those are like part of the allure of sort of the D&D Pathfinder D20-esque sort of game play. And I think that magical items are an important part of that. So, but thank you, Beowulf, for the support. And thank you, Craig, for that as well. Roman says, awesome collab video with the rules lawyer. Yeah, we did that a long time ago, and I honestly thought it was dead because it kind of never went anywhere. I know that some of the people that we did that collab with aren't really even producing content anymore. I think they've gotten out of the game. But I'm a big fan of Ronald. I like what he does. He deserves all the success that he has accumulated. He has a very he's unabashedly a Pathfinder 2 supporter, and he has been a tremendous advocate for the game. Without any sort of recompensation for Paizo for being basically, I think, his number one ambassador. I mean, Nonad, I know, still has a bigger channel, but I think Rules Lawyer, in my personal opinion, is the truest ambassador for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And certainly he has dedicated a good chunk of his life to sort of spreading the gospel of what he thinks about this game. I do not like Pathfinder 2nd Edition as much as Ronald does, but I do appreciate what he's done for the game. And, I'm here talking about it for another 3 hours. So obviously there's something about the game that I like, right? So, yeah, definitely check it out. Head over to Ronald's, the Rules Lawyer, YouTube channel, and you will see that, I think it's top 5 or how to house rule 5 house rules for your D&D game or something to make it better. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's basically turning your D&D into Pathfinder 2nd Edition, or at least, it's a tongue-in-cheek video. And it was also illustrated by our friends over at Deadly D8, who did that amazing collab with us so long ago and when our channel was starting. So pretty fun, and I love to see all the hard work that goes into that stuff. So, all right. Well, it's 9:30. So, we made it through weapons. We talked a little bit about the concept of armor and weapon rune progression as a whole, and the importance of making sure that you at least get your weapon and armor potency runes, your weapon striking runes, and your armor resilient runes. But we did not get to any of the armor runes. So we're going to have to figure out a way to be a little bit quicker about these things. But, there's a lot of data. There's a lot of value out there. And, Paizo doesn't make it easy for us, do they? 300 weapons. 85 weapon runes. I don't even know how many armor runes there are. I don't know. There's like 406 magic items that you can wear. There's a lot of content in this game to sift through. So, my rule of thumb is find something that you think is interesting or find something powerful. And if you can find both, then you're really doing it. So, at the end of the day, the math is pretty tight. You aren't required to have any of these things except for, again, that potency, striking, and resilient runes, which you should definitely get. And as soon as you can, if not earlier. If you can get them earlier, then you can have a lot of fun. But weapon runes are way cooler than armor runes. Anyways, yes. And that's just simply because weapons are active. The player gets to be the one who's driving the action forward. You feel like you're making a difference. Armor runes tend to be more passive and more resistant, and it's not really about you doing something. It's about something not being done to you. Like, for example, the fortification rune, which is pretty much the best armor rune in existence, so fantastic. Whoa, huge super chat coming in late from our man, Craig. Thank you so much for that. Very, very, very thanks. Very, very, very much. Thank you for that. Support for all the videos that I didn't get to watch live. Essentially playing my in arrears bill. Love the PF2 content. Love the Root game. Back to work. Craig, thank you so much. Especially to hear that you loved the Root game. I understand that wasn't for everybody. The views on that were pretty low, but you kind of are highlighting here sort of the strange juxtaposition of our channel. We talk about, we don't really talk about 5th edition D&D, but we talk about Pathfinder 2nd edition. We talk about, which is arguably like the next biggest game, at least in the D20 space. We talk about real nitty gritty stuff like tonight's episodes where we're getting into the specific runes and builds of a weapon, right? We spent 2.5 hours tonight talking about how to build the best weapon. But then we'll also go and run a Powered by the Apocalypse, wide-ranging, free-flowing, super narrative actual play. And, you know, those are basically like the complete polar opposites of our channel. And so if you love the Pathfinder 2 content and you love the Root game, Craig, you are definitely in the right place. And I very much appreciate that generous super chat. So because you are definitely the right person for our channel if you like both of those type of things. But again, big shout out, big thanks to Craig for that super chat and the earlier super chats. Shout out to Boothby, Kyle, Whoopelstein, Dr. Metropolis, Dav Parr, Cybersmith, and Henry, all who supported tonight and made this into quite a little successful stream. Love to have you all here. And again, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell. We go live Tuesdays and Thursdays, but occasionally we go live. Sometimes we go live on Sundays. We're going to be going live this Sunday to talk about a new game. Well, a new old game called Mithras, a game I do not know, but is sort of steeped in the history of role-playing games. I'm going to be talking that with some of my fellow patrons. So it'll be kind of a fun, it's like a deep dive / first look. So our Sunday super streams. And again, those are all things that if you're not subscribed and you haven't rung the bell, you might miss. We are going to try this year to get some more video content out there, or at the least do clips from our shows to make it easier for people to maybe digest some of our content. I get it. Our videos are long. Our streams are long. I talk about a lot of stuff. People ask great questions in chat. I go off on tangents. You know, unlike a lot of other channels, I've got my chat in a teleprompter right here. So when I'm talking to the camera, I am reading everything that you all are saying to me. For the most part, I'm keeping up with it. And that means we'll take the occasional left turn. And so it can be difficult. I understand that, you know, if you're a Knights of the Last Call fan, to always make it through these videos. But that's one of the reasons why we want to do more clips and we want to do more, maybe some more shorter form content just to kind of get in there. So anyways, let me know in the comments what you thought of the rankings. Let me know, or not the rankings, but of the process. Let me know what else we should do for these future interactions. And let me know what you would like to see from Knights of the Last Call as we go into the end of the year, and look forward to a solid, beautiful 2024. Everybody, I hope you have a fantastic week. I hope you have a great weekend. Monday is Columbus Day / Indigenous Peoples Day here in the United States, and my company has given it to us off. I am hoping to spend the weekend with my dad and my family, and hopefully it'll be all good news. And so, look forward to talking to all of you soon. Maybe I'll see you Sunday for our Mithras stream. Thanks again for hanging out with me tonight, and we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace out, everybody. See ya. Bye.